Hello again, everyone. It's good to have you with us for this event. It figures to be an exceptional one that doesn't need any build-up.
Are you ready?
Athletes, take your mark, get set. It's time for the Addict to Athlete podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blue Robinson here. I want to thank you all so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Greatly appreciate you all doing so. As always, continue to jump on and check out that website, addicttoathlete.org. You'll find all kinds of information about addiction recovery, about the process of how Team Addict to Athlete operates. And be able to register for this coming September's Proxy Run 5K. This is an amazing event that helps that healing mindset of recovery and get you engaged in helping others understand that no one finishes these races, this life alone. Get behind that proxy run by registering today. All registrations open. You can find it underneath the events tab on that addicttoathlete.org website. Athlete's got a great guest in here today, one that I've watched for a while. I've been on his podcast, helped him out with a few things. And I love what they're doing with this program. I don't want to give too much away, but I do want to welcome JT Frank to the podcast and Consequence of Habit. JT, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to finally get you to land because you and I have talked before, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the listener base over here on Team Addict to Athlete, because a lot of the philosophies that you have on Consequence of Habit and your own podcast, I think is going to go hand in hand with what these athletes need to hear. So welcome to the podcast, brother. Please introduce yourself and let's just jump in right there.
All right. First off, thanks for having me on, Blue. Real quick backstory before I even go into my story and introduce myself. When I first started this whole thing, I was researching people, organizations that were kind of doing things that I really wanted to do. And your name was one of the first ones that came up. So it's cool for me to be sitting here now talking to you. Like you said, my name's JT. I started Consequence of Habit back in 2020, about a year after I got sober. I had this just idea. COVID was kicking off and I had a podcast studio just from an earlier project that kind of fizzled away. And I had this idea of just talking about our habits and our consequences, the things that we do on a daily basis, and just talking about whether they add value to your life, or is it something that kind of compromises you from the version of yourself that you want, you would like to be. So, although my story was the reason behind it was around alcohol. The more I talk to people, the more I find that everyone's got their poison. Some of the consequences are a little more dire than others, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to get by. And sometimes we find these crutches, right? These things that we do that don't serve us long-term, that make us feel good short-term. Yeah. So that's what it started off. It started as a podcast, and about a year in, we said, hey, I want to do something more. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love podcasts. I love the power of the podcast, but there's something about the actual people meeting up, doing things with each other. This idea of a shared purpose through challenge. And so we started Consequence of Habit as a 501c3 nonprofit. And so now the podcast is an arm of that, but more importantly, we do workshops throughout the year. And we have a couple different types of programs that we're running, and that's it, man. We're still evolving. Mm-hmm. We're still new. So we're throwing things against the walls.
Yeah, finding your niche, exactly, so to speak. And I love it because there's so many things out there, pathways to recovery, people to meet and to experience, to build these relationships. That I've always found it interesting when people start getting vocal about this kind of stuff. And you say, it kind of started like during the pandemic, because that really did throw a wrench into our recovery system. Even here on Team Addict to Athlete, we used to have upwards of 65, 75 people come into our meetings. After COVID, 5, 10, right. And all these years later now, we still are trying to increase. And I'm like, it's relationships that kind of establish the foundation of community and sobriety. And I'm like, it's been crazy to see. So I've loved watching like grassroots level programs like yours kind of start to rise up to say, hey, we need more. We need to kind of get out there and reach. And I love the name. I'm curious about Consequence of Habit. Tell me why you settled on that, because, and we'll get into your story,
sure.
But I really do want to understand, like most people think consequences are super horrible, right?
Well,
but they're not always that bad. Some consequences are really positive. So share with me that.
Yeah, a lot of times when I first talk about this or talk about just consequence of habit in general, they think it's because I've gotten this habit thing figured out, and this was kind of born out of this positivity and me going, hey, I've got this thing that works great. But the answer is this was born out of negative consequences, right? So it was out of my story of I grew up excuse me, from a very young age. Alcohol was always in my life, whether it was through my parents, it was from my grandparents. It was just constantly in my life, and there was there, everyone has their story of rock bottom. My story of wasn't necessarily the same as everybody else's as far as rock bottom goes, but I found that my actions were hurting the people I loved the most, right? My wife, my
Yeah.
family. Uh, Potentially, it could have affected my employment. Like there's these basic fundamental things I thought of myself as a husband, as a father, as a provider, and every single one of those was going to be negatively affected by my
Mhm.
relationship with alcohol. So I started thinking about these consequences, and that's where the name kind of came from. And then I thought about, okay, well, I've not that I've licked this thing, but I've gotten rid of this out of my life. This giant thing, and my life has gotten so much freaking better. So there's this
Mhm.
positive consequence of this one habit of not, of not drinking, of kind of embracing sobriety and going through that process. And so that's kind of where the name came from. There wasn't even like this epiphany. It just kind of came to me, and I like that it was kind of all inclusive. That just like habits, it's a double edged sword. There's good habits, there's bad habits, and they all have consequences. So
It's true.
yeah, so that's just the short on it.
Oh, I love it. I love it, man. But yeah, jump into a little bit of that about, what kind of got you to that point of like, surrendering, throwing up that flag of like, I'm done. I think a lot of people don't realize that it can be as easy as making that legitimate decision that life's not going the way that we want it to. And so I'm going to plant my flag here and I'm done. I'm finished. I'm going to find this more excellent way. Like I'm curious what led you up to that point because leaving those habits behind is hard, man. Like
Yeah.
so many people they just don't realize that when we're in this constant state of like deciding, we don't make decisions. And I'm kind of curious how you kind of came to that decision of like it's over. This is a new way of life now. I found a more excellent way.
Well, it wasn't a fast process. I mean, if I look
Mm-mm.
back uh, for a long time in my life, right? So I went in the military shortly after high school. I was always in communities that really embraced alcohol as not just a way to celebrate, but a way to mourn, a way to get rid of boredom. And I came from a lifestyle of that, even before I was in the military. Just through it, it runs deep uh, in my bloodline. So, um, but with that said, I knew, in my 20s, I said, all right, I'm partying like this is the way I'm doing things, but that's okay because it's expected. I won't do this when I'm in my 30s, right? And then in my 30s, and I'm still having these negative consequences. I'm going, all right, well crap,
Yeah.
man. I'm not going to do this in my 40s. And next thing you know, I'm in my 40s. And it was like this, uh, I ran this experiment over and over and always had the same result. And it usually ended with me either trying to apologize or justifying behavior. Um, and I constantly, I was shown a blueprint on what it means to be an adult. And and then I became an adult and I knew that that wasn't a healthy way of doing things. And then I had kids and I was just passing this thing on to them. So
Yeah.
even though I wouldn't admit it out, out in the open, that always really bothered me. And I've said this on my podcast before, but there was a time where I think my son, he was like in kindergarten. I mean, he was young, and they were talking about our parents and their food. And I think my son said, "Yeah, my dad's favorite drink is beer." And people laughed, and I might like giggled or laughed or something, but man, that one hurt. Like that one kind of hurt.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and without even going into all of the kind of uglier details. It's just these decisions that we make, that they're it's an uglier version for me, because it was an uglier version of me, and I just, we have an idea of what we are and that we put out to the world, like,
Yeah.
this image, but man, that was not how I felt about myself in real life.
Hmm.
And I do tell a story. There's, I tried getting sober before. I'd gone to some meetings. Just like a lot of people, I got to my first 12 step, and I'm like, yeah, these people are not me. Like, I've never been to jail. I've never gotten a DUI. I've never done all these things. And so these people aren't me. And then I went back out, and then I ran that same experiment over and over. And not long after that, I made this decision. Uh, I said, that's it. I was actually coming back from a work trip, and
Hmm.
I landed. It was a long trip. It was like an international trip, and I landed that night, and I went to my first meeting, at February 4th, 2019, and that was started. That was like the one where I said, "All right, my life has become unmanageable, and I'm willing to accept that this thing is, that I'm powerless over it." So here we are.
Yeah. That's that I love it, man. And sometimes we forget about the slow burn that it truly is, you know. And one thing we say quite frequently on Addict Athlete is if you're going to erase the addiction, you have to replace it with something, of greater value. And I even say some things, maybe multiple outlets of things of greater value. As you made that transition and you left kind of that again, that coping, that celebration, that staple, um, behind, what did you replace it with? Because a lot of times, when we stop, we're like, the fish in the bags at the end
Yeah.
of Finding Nemo, where they're like, "Well, now what?" Like, how did you make the transition from like, "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm doing that," because I think we're very lucky in Utah. Utah gets a bad rap a lot, but we're also very lucky because it's not so in your face. There's, you don't walk into a store and the first thing you don't see is the wine section, right? You see like the cereal on sale or something. In fact, if you want any kind of alcohol, you have to go to a state liquor store. So
Sure.
it makes it a little bit more inconvenient. So we are lucky that way in the recovery aspect. But like, how do you replace that when it's so prevalent? But also like, I need something different to be able to cope.
Well, I was lucky that I found sober people. Matter of fact, my sponsor, was so I was even when I was heavily drinking. I was physical fitness has always still continued. It was always a part of my life. Like, I was still
Yeah.
running, I was still lifting, I was climbing, and there was a guy from my climbing gym that ended up becoming my sponsor. Now,
Awesome.
I had no idea that he was sober. I actually said to my wife, like, I feel like he might be. Just there's something, like, well, we can spot our own, and by being,
Yeah.
I don't mean sober people. I mean people that have there's it.
Histories.
Yeah,
Hmm.
right. So, I had said to him, I said, "Hey," I was at the climbing gym with him. I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about, uh, I'm gonna get back in shape, and I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna try quitting drinking, and I'm just gonna start living a little bit different." I said, "Hey, do you drink?" And he says, "I've been sober 14 years." Uh,
Sweet.
so, and this gets me choked up almost every time I talk about it. Uh, I said, "Man, that sounds like I'm going to lean on you a little bit. I'm really curious on how you did it." And that starting that very next day, this guy has sent me a text almost every single day. Start my day with either a page from the big book or just checking in to see how I'm doing. And we don't even talk all that often, but I get something
Hmm.
every single day from this guy. Uh, and so I continued. I was really into climbing. I was climbing. I was still working out, and then I was at meetings a lot. So that helped. Um, what I was worried about the most is everything you're talking about, like a fish being on what, like everything socially around my life revolved
Yeah.
around alcohol. So I didn't know how that was going to play out, and I think that's from everyone I talked to is a common concern. Um, But what I found was, one, I have a very supportive family, amazing wife who doesn't drink. not for the same reasons I don't. She just doesn't.
Mhm.
And the friends that I talked to, the friends I hung out with, my drinking friends did not understand at first,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't expect him to. But
Mhm.
over time, they got it. It was, I even tried minimizing. I'm like, well, I'm just not going to drink for 3 months. I'm not going to drink for three
Yeah.
months. And then they're like, 3 months was coming up. They're like, finally you're back. I'm like, no, I think I'm done with this. Like this isn't,
Yeah.
my life has gotten so much easier.
Yeah, we do 3 more
Yeah,
months.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Like there's my life has gotten way, way easier. And then uh I was there. It was a weird time, Blue, because I was a host of another podcast for a
Mhm.
performance drink company called Killcliff. And right when I got sober, they were like flying us, like they flew us down to North Carolina to be on the Drinking Bros podcast. And
Yeah.
I so I was a
Yeah.
guest on it. And here I am sober.
You're like, "Here I
I'm
am."
like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna bore the crap out of you guys with the drinking part. But um
That's awesome.
yeah, so I some of this stuff I just remain the same as far as the physical fitness. I am really embraced like a Wim Hof like breath work. That's
Mhm.
been a fairly big part of my kind of recovery. Matter of fact, it's one of the workshops. We have one tomorrow. Um, and some of these are gonna be specifically for people in recovery. So I'd say I really leaned into that, and then I leaned into not long after consequence of habit will probably fill that up. Like
Yeah.
that was my new thing. It was, and I put a lot of energy, and I was actually COVID tricked me into thinking I had all the time in the world because I wasn't working a lot on my full time job, and um,
Yep.
but it's been a little precarious balancing everything now. Now we're all back.
For sure. For sure. But then that's the question I have though, because you come from, a military background. You come from this discipline, but you also come from that place of, do I ask for help? And you kind of leaning on your climbing buddy and saying, "Hey, what do you think?" That's asking for help. And people have the hardest time doing that. Like even asking, "Hey, do you want to, would you be my sponsor?" That kind of stuff is so difficult and challenging. What opened you up? Because I would imagine that's not typically how you would operate. Like like you said, you must have felt something, experienced something that now's the time I got to seize this opportunity. And it sounds like you got a great one that actually does the job of a sponsor. Um, how hard was it to cross that threshold of like, I'm needing a little help here, a little guidance, because that's not what us guys do.
No, I mean it didn't come natural, but I would say I was at a point in my life that I was pretty desperate for something to change. I felt like I was at a crossroads
Mhm.
where like something was going to change, or I was just going to be
Yeah.
the same from here on out. And I don't know if that's true, but that's just how I felt at the time. So I
Mhm.
was fairly open to change. And I do remember not long after I quit, and we were going climbing somewhere. It was a drive. I think we are going down to Baltimore or something. And we're just talking about stories. We're just talking about people that that drank or drugged, or talking about some of your stories. And I remember when you find your own, you feel like, and you can open up about things, you can actually put everything out there, not this polished version of it that we put on social media. And I
Yep.
remember, now I used to do that with people I drank with, and they would laugh, or not at me, but they got it right, like that hidden bottles, that whatever, like it was because it was part of their story too, and they didn't judge you because they were doing the same thing. And I remember him turning to me and saying, "Man, you're one sick puppy, man. You need some help."
Oh man.
I was like, "Oh, geez,
Whew.
man." Like I wasn't expecting that. Um, but it is weird coming from that military and being a first responder, even in law enforcement. Like you would have these conversations with people, and like you would say, "I don't drink. I'm not drinking," right? And they would give you a hard time and like, "What are you doing, man?" Like, but when nobody was around, when it was just you and that person, not always, but a lot of time, some of the times, those same people would one ask me what my motivation was, and then that would start the conversation. Like, I've thought about doing the same thing, and
Mhm.
then I've had multiple conversations with people like, yeah, I've been thinking about trying the same thing. I just don't know how. And it's always an interesting conversation, right? Because like, well, why did you quit? And I go through the same things
Yeah.
I explained to you. I go, well, it made me like a not so great husband. It made me a not so great dad. It made me a crappy employee. And, there was I could lose it all. So I started going to these 12-step meetings. They go, whoa, 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 whoa. You went to a
Yeah.
12-step meeting? Like it was that bad? I go, did you just hear everything else I said leading up to this? Like the most
Yeah.
basic things that I think about myself and what I provide for my loved ones uh, is
Is in
compromised, is in
jeopardy.
jeopardy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was that bad. And they'll tell their story. I say, hey man, like if you ever want to go to one, like just let me know. And they said, well, I mean, I couldn't do that. Like, what if I ran into somebody I know? I go, well, they're there because they were a big enough person to realize that they had a problem and they actually did something about it. Like to me, that's courage. Like people that just keep doing the same, knowing that it will like what you're doing to yourself and your loved ones. Like to me,
Mhm.
that's I don't know if cowardice is the right word, but it takes courage, man, to like you said, to put that stuff out to the world, to tell your
Mhm.
family, to put that because now what? Like what if you go back? What if you go
Yeah.
That's a scary proposition. It took me a while to tell my kids. It took me a while.
You wanted to show them before you told them. Is that kind of like you want to they could probably tell, because your kids were probably they weren't little infants at this time.
No,
I'm
no,
sure
no.
were old enough to be able to articulate like something's changing. And I'm curious, what did you notice about yourself, about your family system that absolutely changed, and they were kind of like, "Wow!" Like, was it just more time? Was it just more emotional investment? Was it the creation of like emotional safety? Like, what do you notice that's like you could like breathe and be like, "This is what I wanted. Like, this is what's
You,
happening now because of my decision."
I first and foremost was the relationship with my wife, but with the kid. So this is the, I like to have this conversation because when I first got sober, I almost felt like nah, I shouldn't say this, but like a half-ass drinker. Like
Yeah,
I didn't get like you wouldn't find me passed out slurring like that. And not that there's anything like I'm not judging anybody. Everybody's got their own thing. I just couldn't stop drinking. Like so if I drank
yeah,
a bottle and a half or a bottle of wine or a six pack or 8 beers in a night or something along those lines, you probably didn't notice that much in me,
hmm,
but I did it every single day. So
right,
they would realize that first that, hey, he's not drinking. There's no glass of wine. There's no beer. He's not having a bourbon around the campfire. Uh,
hmm,
so that would probably be the first thing. My oldest daughter was in college. So, I, she, let me back up. You can only go to meetings at night for so long before your kids, you're like, what kind of meetings are happening at 8 o'clock at night? Like that it
absolutely,
doesn't make any sense. Um, so my oldest was the first to know, uh, and then my two younger ones. But yeah, I think one, it was just the absence of it, and then
hmm,
probably just more peace in my household. There was just more peace. Like I wasn't. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It's that vicious cycle, right? We do something to feel good, which makes us act a certain way, which makes us feel like crap. So we want to
yeah.
feel good again, and it becomes this constant cycle. So that wasn't there as much. So I knew the household was just it was just a lot easier to be around for
Yeah.
everybody. So that's a really long winded answer. If
No, but it's perfect though, and that's kind of what I want these listeners to do is because there's a there's a difference between someone like you who says to themselves, I'm done. I want to be done. I want to be finished with this like phase of life, versus the one that gets pulled over by the cops for DUI and gets forced into it. Because that's coming eventually. There's something going to happen
yes,
as a consequence of your behavior
right,
and that habit, right? And so it's like I love the fact that you decided to throw the wrench in yourself. It wasn't thrown in your gears. You threw it in there because you're like, I want a way out. And I think both paths can find some I don't know, some solace in recovery. I mean, if you're court ordered or if you do it yourself. But I think there comes a great level of introspection and just like care of self and love, compassion for themselves to say, I don't like the way this is. You don't have to be the blackout drinker, do you? You can be a person that's just like, things might be better. No, in fact, things could be better if I changed instead of everyone else around me should change. And I think that's one of the coolest things, brother, when I hear stories like yours, is that you decided, no one decided for you, and it made it probably a little bit more, I don't know, like strong to a certain degree because it was your decision.
I used to look at people that would get. I had a roommate when I was just getting out of the military, and his dad was an alcoholic, and he there was either sober or there was like out of control drunk, and I was. This sounds crazy. I was almost jealous of that because that decision had to be made for him. Like that was
Mhm.
it was like you just can't do it because if you do, the wheels fall off, right? Like if you want some resemblance of a normal life, you have to live this lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I kept when people think that they're balancing it, and some can, but I was really good at acting like I could. Like I drank good beer. I drank. I didn't drink very good wine, but I drank.
Mhm.
So like at least if I was drinking wine while I was making dinner, that I didn't have a problem. I drank good bourbon. But at the end of the day, my reasoning behind it was exactly the same as somebody drinking cheap stuff. Uh,
Mhm.
but this idea that I could portray this thing like I got it all figured out, but at the same time, I'm buying a bottle of wine and then three those little pony shots for when I got home, and those they're stashed, under something in the garbage. Like, there's these. It's not real. And I've had other guests on. And we talk about like the CEO meeting with yourself at 2:30 in the morning when you know your alcohol's kicking off and you're wide awake, and it's
Yeah.
just you and yourself, and you can't fool. There's nobody else to fool, right? And it's just so
Mhm.
you gotta. And you know about the DUI, like that check was in the mail. Like that could have happened a million different times. Like
Yeah.
that's I tell guys that I work with, like I could just be sitting in traffic and get rear-ended. Like it's not my fault, but it's my fault if if I'm over, and there's
Yeah.
plenty of times I was. So
Exactly.
it's luck. I lucked
Exactly.
out. That was it.
Consequence of habit,
Yes,
man. Yeah,
yes,
and that is like, hey, wait a minute, I'm the innocent bystander. No, you're guilty because of your association with the alcohol or with the
yes,
substance, you know? And I think sometimes we forget about that kind of stuff. And well, we do, we knock on wood and we count our lucky stars, but on the same breath, it's like eventually it's going to rear its ugly head. And I'm just kind of blown away by your willingness to kind of see it yourself. Because I'm sure there were people that were probably hinting, maybe some close loved ones and stuff, but you said the mass majority of people, they'd never know the
mm-mm,
misery that we kind of suffer in. And a lot of times I hear this, JT, is that people are afraid to change because they're like, what's it going to do to me?
yeah,
Who am I going to be without this? Right. I find this all the time when I'm working with people with trauma. They'll want to do the EMDR therapy and they'll do this stuff with me, but they're worried about it because they've kind of based their whole life around this trauma. I am that victim of trauma. And once that's removed, it's like, well, who am I without it? It's kind of like it's a sad thing that it happens that way. So we talk about you've got to fill that void up. Um, did you have a plan for who you were going to become without it,
no.
or did you let that kind of naturally take its place?
Uh, Yeah, I think it just kind of naturally took its place. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a plan on, like, literally I got home, was like, that's it. I'm going to a meeting and we're gonna see what
Mm.
happens. And I was doing stand-up comedy too. I'm like, how am I gonna do stand-up comedy like without throwing a couple beers back before? Like
Yeah.
there was so many aspects I didn't know the answers to on how it was gonna work out. Uh
Ah.
but uh, and I'm still learning. I'm still blue. I'm still learning. I'm
Yep.
still figuring out. I still have consequences to negative habits, and uh, I will say that this has taught me the biggest thing that has taught me. Well, there's a couple, but one, I'm better at recognizing my actions are finding the root cause behind them or why I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
escape. Like, so if I'm not comfortable in my own skin, in my own head, I will inevitably start finding ways to feel good, and those have are 100% going to probably or 100% not good for me long term.
Mm-hmm.
Or I get extremely agitated, like I'm a jackass on the road, or there's something behind that.
Yeah,
It's not the driver, right? Like, it's not the guy who cut me off. It's something internal that's going on.
for sure.
So I'll be at least curious about that. And then the other thing is, I have a lot more empathy for people now, having gone through, that process of trying to figure out why I did the things I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you I judge people less. And if I'm not, if I'm am being super judgmental, that's another clear sign that I got something going on. It's not
I
them.
got something to unpack
Yeah,
here. Yeah,
it's
I
me.
love the fact that you're reflecting on that and you're realizing that it's not about them, it's about you.
It
And
doesn't.
listeners, sometimes that's a hard freaking bridge to cross, isn't it? When it's like, wait a
Uh,
minute, the common denominator and all this stuff is me. That's
yeah,
a rough one, isn't it?
yeah, and I'm not, it doesn't always happen in real time, Blue.
No.
But there, after, and even, my wife's even pointed out where if I'm not in a good place, like, hey, what's going on? It's even if I don't admit it, like, nothing's going on. Like, it's this guy, or it's you, or it's and then, but after some reflection or some exercise or something, it makes it a little easier to see through the fog and, like, oh, no, this is,
Yeah.
yeah, but sometimes it may be somebody else, but like I said, everyone needs a dance partner. So
Absolutely, man.
yeah,
Absolutely. But you know what, though, brother? I hear this and I want to kind of touch base on something you said a little while ago. I'm a firm believer that movement equals healing, and we can't just sit. We have to move. Our bodies aren't designed just to be stationary. We got to move. Um, Climbing is kind of a crazy thing for me, and I have no idea why in the world anyone would want to do that because it's scary in a lot of
yeah,
different ways. I'm curious though, like how do you use some of that physical agility and that physical like exertion to kind of like show yourself what you're capable of and kind of continue that healing process through moving and not just sitting around you know preaching or listening but like literally moving. Have you noticed anything?
yeah. Well, to me, it comes back to like a stillness. Like, alcohol calmed me down. It slowed things down, and I didn't feel this constant rattling around of thoughts, and um, or at least I felt like it did, and it maybe did
Hmm.
temporarily. But exercise always does the same thing. Like, if you got a lot of anxiety or you're feeling stressed out, almost always, if you go outside and you walk, for an hour, or you lift weights, or you climb, or you run, or whatever it is, uh, it makes me feel a certain way, and it slows everything down.
Hmm.
It makes my mind a little more still, and just like breath work does some of the same things to me. But I think there's a medicine to movement, man, and if I don't take that medicine on a regular basis, I will become agitated. All of those things I talked about before of these symptoms of not being in a good place will manifest themselves much easier if I haven't engaged in some type of physical activity.
I love it. But I don't know, I'd love you to kind of give me your own philosophy on some of that too. Like the breath work. I think that it's kind of funny that we have everything we need inside of us to solve our own problems if we'll tap into it.
Yeah,
And something as simple as breath work can create such amazing pathways to well-being, calm. I'm curious because it is breathwork's kind of a newer thing. It's been around
sure.
for ages. Obviously, we've been breathing since the dawn of time, but like it's different. And to be quite honest, man, I've never had a guest on here that's talked about it. And so I'd love to kind of know your thoughts on how it works, why it works, and kind of what you do to kind of like utilize it as a tool to just get mindful.
So, so the irony of this is, I was doing some of these things while I was drinking. Like, I always wanted to be better, physically, mentally, but was still poisoning myself on a regular basis. Like, you're swimming against the current at this point, right? So, but when I got sober, I really leaned into breath work, and so whether that just be, I tried box breathing, I tried meditation. I always had a hard time, like most people, uh, keeping up with that on a regular basis. People say I tried meditating, but these thoughts keep coming back in, so I quit. We're like, well,
Yeah.
that's the whole point of it. Is to recognize that, like, without judgment, and just go back to following your breath. But then I found Wim Hof breath work, which is like a style of breath work. Um, and that's a little more intensive, and it's a lot of times also associated with some cold exposure. So, like tomorrow's event, we'll go over the Wim Hof fundamentals, which, if anyone hasn't looked into it or tried it, then I'll give you a quick explanation. It would be
Yeah.
like 40 deep breaths all the way in, all the way out. There is no set number, but 40 is the one I like to use. And then on
Mhm.
the 40th, you breathe your air out, and then you hold. And you hold for like a
Mhm.
minute, and then you'll go right back into another round. And I think tomorrow we'll probably do about 8 rounds of that. Um, and that gives me a calmness and a stillness that I have rarely found in my life afterwards for a period of time. And then I'll probably do 5 minutes in an ice bath. I think there's a lot of great synergy in getting in an ice bath with
Yeah.
sobriety. Uh,
Yeah.
I tell people, like, look, you have to accept the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable. If you fight it, it's going to be way worse. The anticipation is way worse than the actual going through it. And if you can just relax and breathe through the discomfort and know you're going to be okay, there's something on the other side of it. And that's been a big part for me. So
I love it. That's 100% like recovery. You take every principle that you just explained there and you put that into addiction recovery. How do you see it one and the same?
yeah, it's that it's going to be,
If you fight it,
you
it's
have
gonna
to
suck.
suck.
Uh-huh.
Accept it. Like, it's not going to be comfortable. If anyone says it's going to be, they're lying to you.
They're lying to you. Yep.
But you're gonna be okay. And the outcome on the other side, for me, an ice bath is, it's gonna be an increased dopamine level. You're gonna feel good for the rest of the day. You're gonna be proud of yourself. You've done something um, that a lot of people won't do because they're scared of it. And so, yeah, I think there's a ton of synergy between the two.
I love it, man. And that's the thing. I think a lot of people have a hard time with this kind of stuff because again, they worry about like the most obscure things. Like, what's it going to be like? Am I going to be able to do it? What if it doesn't work? And it clogs everything up to the point where we just stop, right? We're just like, okay, I'm not even going to try this. I mean, yeah, it's the funniest thing. You get into an ice bath, and the first thing you're thinking of is, I want to get out. I've watched people do this with walking over hot coals. I've
Sure.
seen so many things where it literally is, w- you know, it's the resistance to the what is that causes your suffering. So just embrace
Yes.
it and get through it, right?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, there's a book by Dr. Anna Lemke called Dopamine Nation, and
Mm,
she talks to all kinds of different clients about people that want help, right, from some type of addiction. And it could be, I mean, it could be cannabis, it could be cell phones, social media. And it's like, look, if you take the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks and you take this thing out of your life, at least you're gonna have a clear picture of the influence it's had on you, right? That's one thing I think when you talk to people that end up getting sober is, you need that distance to realize how bad it really was, because you've been living in it
yeah,
for so long that you don't even realize.
good point.
But it is going to be uncomfortable, and you're gonna have to just accept that. Like, that's part of, it's the price of admission, man. Like,
Hmm.
you're gonna have to dig in, and it's gonna suck. But uh, you know, not you owe it to everyone. You owe it to yourself, and you owe it to everyone around you. Like, you deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. I think of things like rock climbing, like you were saying. I can think of no more uncomfortable sport than that because you can't go anywhere but up. And it's kind of like I've watched Alex Honnold and I've watched these documentaries and I'm like, holy crap! Like there is no giving up. And I think sometimes we're afraid to put ourselves in those kind of situations, but we don't realize that in active addiction, you are always in that position. Like there's no freedom there. There's a lot of variation to scarcity right there. So I don't know, man. I love that fact. But here's my question. I know we're kind of getting too close to time, but how did you become such a calm individual? Because I've noticed this about you, that you have this very calming presence. I've talked to many people that are just, full throttle in your face. Um, and all the stuff you're doing, you could be that person, but you're not. You bring a different kind of vibe that's very, I don't know, like calming. Like, how did you develop that? Because again, if you're in the military and you have that background, you have all that stuff, you weren't always this, hey, let's just talk about, you know what I'm saying? Like, how did you develop this mindset of just like, I'm gonna let things just kind of flow and see where they go?
Well, I mean, for the record, it doesn't always. It, that's not the way I always am. But I'm not. You, you've seen this probably. Even in the world of recovery, there is a lot of. Um, I don't know if bravado is the right word, but this kind of like in your face. Oh
Noise.
no, yeah, and that
Yeah.
I talked about being on this other podcast and hosting it and, being on like the Drinking Bros. And the one thing I really felt was I was just not being authentic. That just isn't me.
Yeah.
And, and even, even in with consequence of habit. I mean, I struggle with that sometimes, even being authentic with it because we have ambassadors that are, we got like Taylor Spike, the guy's run a
Yep.
300-mile race and these, we've got some just absolute animals and they are, kind of in your face. And it's just not me, man. It's just
I
not
had
there.
Taylor on the podcast a couple weeks ago and he cried. So yeah,
Yeah.
I know
Well,
he's got a big heart. I love that guy.
He was one of my first guests.
Yeah.
When I started this, he was one of my very first guests and he's a pretty amazing individual. But I don't know, man. I just feel like I'm not, I'm not Jocko. I'm not like matter of fact. I always think that I never want people to look at what we're doing and think that's unattainable because
Yeah.
they're a different these people are doing this and that's just too far above what like we've got people that are just living their normal life and to me there's just much studs in doing that than somebody who's you know climbing Everest or doing these amazing things like
Hmm.
it if you can stop doing one thing in your life that is completely destroying your life and the people around you, to me dude, that's about as in your face as you can get. Like that
I
is
love it.
yeah, that's
Yeah, man.
something special.
Yeah, that's a victory that is worth celebrating in
Yes.
my eyes. Yeah, brother, and that's kind of the gist of it. Is do your thing. Change your patterns, your behaviors, if that's something you want to do, and enjoy these new consequences of these new habits because they're going to be great, and you'll know how to flow through the consequences of old habits if they rear their ugly head because now you have the knowledge of it.
Yes.
I mean, listeners, this is the thing is what JT's talking about is real principle, and I love the fact that there are resources out there like what he's doing. How do people get in touch with you, man? I mean, like, what socials are you on? I mean, I know, but they should probably you hear it from you.
Yeah. So we're on Instagram, LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We don't do much. I'm constantly talking about being authentic, Blue. I struggle with
Yeah,
social media, this social media thing. Because
me too. My daughter does all of ours.
I'm drawn to. I have an addictive personality, man. I got ADHD and these things. I get sucked into them pretty easily.
Me too, brother.
So I'm constantly struggling with that. But we are on social media. Our website, we're trying to funnel everything more towards that, and we have some
Yeah.
resources on there. You've had Chris on here. Chris is on there. He's got some meditation resources
Yes.
on there. So
Love Chris.
yeah, we've got some different things on there, and then that's where we talk about our upcoming workshops. We've got a recovery specific Wim Hof breathwork workshop happening in August. We've got some speaker events coming up. Zach Clark, from the guy who won the Bachelorette, who's been huge in the world of recovery, is coming to speak on behalf of us. And so yeah, I would say the website would be the place. And then if you just want to ever email me, it's just jt@consequenceofhabit.org. Just hit me up anytime. I'm always happy to talk.
That is awesome. Yeah, brother. And that's the beauty of it is like, listeners, these are real people that have a desire to want to help serve and provide something to you. So please look them up and check them out. And like I said, I know JT, I know the consequence of habit because we rub shoulders with a lot of the same people, and they're all amazing individuals in life and in recovery that are here to help. And so, yeah, we'll put all those socials on here. But listeners, you've been well fed. This is one of those podcasts too that I want you guys to just kind of keep kind of on bookmarked, for that simple fact of like change can happen when you're ready to make it, and it doesn't have to be again a DUI or whatnot. If you're unhappy with the way that life is kind of progressing, take a knee, call a timeout, go get that help, and then step up to that plate and be ready to help the next people come down the line, because we need more people to start taking up those roles to help the next people coming up. So JT, thanks for being a guest on today's podcast, brother. I totally appreciate it, man.
Blue, thank you so much. Like I said from the very beginning, your name has come up. The program that you've been running is one that Chris Norris and he's a member of the board. We've sat down and looked at and said, hey, how do we take what Blue's doing? Because you guys are doing some amazing work. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for everything you do.
Anything we can do to help, brother, that's what we're here for. Great minds think alike. And listeners, you've been well fed. Continue to do all that you do. Reach out if you need some help. Check that website, addicttoathlete.org, for more information. And do your best to turn your mess into your message.
This is the man.